Hello, welcome to EC Council's Cybersecurity Podcast. I'm Jay Bavisi and I'm your host. Today, I have Kurtis Minder. He's a ransomware negotiator. He's a hacker. He's a hunter. He's a researcher. And he's the guy Fortune 500's call when they get a ransom note. Today, we're going to try to get into the world of ransomware. We're going to try to go deep into the criminal underground and to figure out what's actually driving them and what's actually thriving. Kurtis, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Jay.
So, Kurtis, let's start by talking about what you do. You're an expert of ransomware, and you do that because you've got expertise in having a very large amount of teams that are able to infiltrate into the criminal underground. Talk a little bit about yourself and tell us, how did you get there?
Well, like any company, we start with one mission and then sort of the universe drives us in different directions over time. So, originally we were going sort of more down a traditional platform approach to almost a cyber intelligence approach. And what we learned was, in order to be competitive in that space and be able to do that well, you really had to have your finger on the pulse of what the bad guys were doing, where they were going. They move around, right, as technology changes. And in order to do that, you had to run basically an espionage operation. So you had to become digital spies, make friends with the bad guys so you get invited to the party. And over a 12-year period, roughly, we became quite good at that.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is James Bond stuff. James Bond in the
nerdy
cyber
James
world.
Bond stuff.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And how do you about go around recruiting the professionals that work for you that are then able to be your, shall I say, cyber agents?
Yeah, I mean, when we started, we were pulling people from the traditional IC community because we were based in DC. So there was plenty of these people around that know the tradecraft, the processes around how to do this well. Over time, and it took us a while to get this, sort of dialed in, we learned how to bring in sort of new, fresh faces. They're young, but they're all typically in the hacker space. A lot of them are very big gamers, things like that that have certain personality traits that make them good at. It's almost like how the CIA recruits, right? They have a very good process for determining what kind of person would be able to do this well, and then also maintain those sort of relationships and personas without being detected.
But if you it might be a stupid question, but if you go out and you hire someone and says, listen, we're going to do cyber espionage, we're the good guys, we're trying to infiltrate into criminal gangs around the world that are doing ransom, there's a very strong possibility some of these people might turn on you. I mean, how do you hire, how do you train, how do you manage, and how do you operate?
Yeah, so obviously there's always going to be some risk, especially when you're walking a very fine line in doing what we're doing. We do have, so first of all, nobody comes straight in and starts talking to bad guys on our behalf. That's not how it works. There's a whole process. These people come in initially as analysts, and they'll work their way into those teams that are actually touching the bad guys in the dark web. So we get to know them pretty well before we give them the keys to anything that could compromise us as a business. Our background checks are pretty rigid. In fact, we use a firm that is primarily out of the CIA that does all of our background checks. So, when some people do background checks, they pay backgroundcheck.com or something, $40. Ours costs a lot more than that.
Many more zeros.
Yeah, so we're careful about who we pick. And, I'm not going to lie, we've had some misses, over a 12-year period. You're not going to bat 1,000, but we've done a pretty good job. Our process for sort of vetting these people is pretty rigid. Yeah.
So tell us about, how did you start? I mean, you're not born into this completely, right? I heard a saying that you are either born into cybersecurity or you grow into one, right?
Right.
I am an attorney and I grew into cybersecurity. What about you? Are you born into
Congratulations, by the way. Yeah. Sort of. I mean, when I was young, I got into the computer industry very young. And one of the first jobs I had, I was like 16 years old, was assistant sysadmin at a internet company. Back when you had to dial up to the internet, and there's these little regional companies that provided the internet. And in those early days, it was fairly frequent. We were finding people in our systems that weren't supposed to be there. Now, usually back then, these weren't like nation states or somebody with sort of a cyber criminal organization. There was somebody who was trying to prove how smart they were. It was really benign. But I was always fascinated with that, and how do I catch them, and how do I document that, and what are the steps to prevent it in the future? And it snowballed, So I started pretty young.
Wow, that's amazing. And how did you set up this company?
So the last like real job I had was running a service provider team for a large tech manufacturer cybersecurity manufacturer that had just recently IPO'd. And so as you know, being in the industry for something like 20 years by that point, I had noticed that many of the products and solutions were almost guessing what the problem was. And you think about why intelligence exists, like from a government, you know what I mean? It's to inform you about what your adversary is doing so that you can allocate your resources accordingly, right? Your limited resources accordingly. And while there was some versions of what is now cyber intelligence back then, nobody was really doing this, where they were doing what we call human intelligence operations against the bad guys to gather that data.
What do you mean by human?
That's a military term. It just means human intelligence. That means, basically infiltrating and trying to befriend, almost something like the CIA would do in a movie with the bad guys, and then building trust, and then understanding what they're up to, what they're trying to do ahead of the attack.
So tell me, I've seen all the Hollywood movies right, where you get the undercover cop and they infiltrate into the drug, the drug lords and the gangs, and they risk their lives into this. Is it dangerous for you guys?
I suspect that there are probably countries I should not travel to.
Right.
And I have been told before by law enforcement not to go on certain trips, but I don't.
Did you?
No, I didn't go.
Yeah, okay.
Now, when the FBI calls you and says, "Hey, I'd say stay home on this one," okay,
Okay.
But yeah, so we, we're probably introducing some personal risks, and there are things that we do both from a company standpoint and then I do personally to try to mitigate that. Most of the time, the bad guys don't know it's me.
Right.
They know what we do, but it's hard to like attribute that to a specific, act. At least if we're doing it well, it is.
And how big is this industry? Are there many, shall I say, Tom Cruises, Elias Curtises out there in this world?
The digital risk industry is quite large, tens of billions of dollars. But this part of it, this niche of threat actor engagement or cyber espionage, is pretty small. It's monetized in those other products, but there's a small group of people who are actually the tip of the spear doing this kind of work.
But if the United States, has professionals like you that run a full operation, it is imaginable that other nations do exactly the same.
They do, and sometimes at a much larger scale. Yeah.
Right, and they are probably not necessarily going after the cyber criminal gangs here in the U.S., but they might be going after just legitimate businesses, organizations, departments.
This is where that North Korean, remote worker, scam is coming from. That's the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Infiltrating an organization. Yeah.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that. That's a great pivot point, right? About the whole North Korean case.
So it's been in the news now, covered pretty well. But the North Koreans, obviously, because of the sanctions, they're always looking for creative ways to get revenue into the country. They're also looking at ways to sort of infiltrate and steal intellectual property. They've done a number of fairly successful Bitcoin and cryptocurrency heists. One of the latest things that they're doing is they're training sort of the North Korean cyber army type folks. They're actually employed by the government to interview using AI and some other tools to interview and get remote worker jobs for U.S. companies. And so in that they are getting a paycheck for one, but they've also got access to systems and stuff that they could use for intellectual property theft, stuff like that.
So with deepfakes now, it's very easy because you can just be a whole new person,
right,
have an American accent. In fact, I was just talking to an AI expert, and he was telling me that there was a company, and I won't name the company on camera because I don't think this company requires to be popularized, but it's a company that's been built completely to cheat. And what it does is it allows you to basically have a Zoom conversation, and as the interview is asking you a question, the answers of the questions actually been transcribed right in front of you. So you're looking into the camera.
Almost like a teleprompter.
Yeah, like a teleprompter.
Wow. That's great.
And and this company, like I don't know, within 2 or 3 months, did like $100 million ARR or something bizarre like that. So now criminal gangs are able to answer any questions that anyone is going to ask, and is going to be able to, at the same time with deepfake, be someone else and have a completely different accent. And I guess you'll be able to get a job. And that to you is probably one of the largest problems, right?
Right. And it does speak to what your original question was, is, are our adversaries doing the same thing we are doing? Yes. The use case might be slightly different, but they are.
So how do you stay ahead of this? Because there are many countries, there are many languages to be used, right? You need to understand Mandarin, you need to understand Cantonese, because even within China there are different languages. If we talk of India, there are so many different dialects that are out there. If we talk of Pakistan, exactly the same. So how do you deal with that?
Well, there's going to be several. There's never going to be one answer to these solutions to these problems, but obviously technology is part of it. Can we use technology to detect what they're doing on a technology side to obfuscate themselves, whether that's how they're accessing systems remotely, things like that. The other would be some form of intelligence, understanding what are their tools and tactics, so that we can identify them in just our operational, observation of their work. So it'll be a combination of things, but it will be difficult.
So Kurtis, tell me something. When my education into espionage is, I'm a very good student. I've seen every James Bond movie, every Mission Impossible, right? And I've learned a lot. I can tell you I'm an expert, right?
Right.
I might not be able to hang out of planes, but I can talk to you bits and bytes. But tell me something. When you are going to infiltrate these criminal gangs, many times they will say proof that you are not a good guy. So why don't you go steal that stuff? Why don't you go hack the stuff?
Right.
Do you guys ever do that?
So I don't want to give away all the secrets, but there are methods to crossing those litmus tests that don't require us to do illegal things. Part of that is having the tenure that we have. So we have, I said 10 plus years building these personas. There's a lot of trust built into some of these personas, and that trust then can be transferred to others. We can transact in a very public way. I'm giving away a couple. We can transact in a very public way in these platforms and have disputes and things like that with ourselves, right? So, to the bad guys, it's two individuals that they think are threat actors doing a transaction. So in some cases, we are selling ourselves illegal stolen things or what, so it makes the appearance that there's actual illicit activity, but it's really just recycled data.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was at the keynote of Mikko Hipponen at the Black Hat 2025. I'm not sure if you were there.
I wasn't, no, but I heard about it.
But he spoke about this, and he presented a video of a criminal underground gang called Global. And he presented a video that was created by the gang to market themselves, just like you would have a advertisement of Tesla, right?
Right.
The only difference was it was a highly interesting advertisement created on video with an amazing music pitch sequencing.
Wow.
And what this did was it was basically telling one criminal telling an entire group of criminals that, hey, I can help you do ransomware. And this is what really blew my mind off. The service that they provide was, number one, they will find you the victims. They'll help you do the ransomware. They even provide 24/7
support.
AI support.
Yeah.
That was mind-boggling, right? That the commercialization of ransomware. So can you talk a little bit? You've been the guy that's been in the field, you're the real deal. Right? Talk a little bit about these ransomware gangs. And are they all nation-state actors? Are they private? Are they criminals?
I mean, there's a complex answer to that, but generally, no, they're not all nation state. I don't like using superlatives for any of this. Anything's possible, but I think calling them gangs has really misled the public. Gangs sort of are a loose affiliation, maybe thought of as somewhat disorganized. Most of these guys are not that, and it's more to your use case that you were talking about with the video. They run it very much like a business, and when you're negotiating with them or you're interacting with them, understanding that and understanding the individual groups and how they're structured and things like that is very helpful, so you can understand their motivation. So they have they have rank. They've got middle management. They've got quotas. They've got bonuses. They've got President's Club. They've got
You're kidding me. Wow.
So they run it very much like a business, and so that's important to understand. If they're your adversary, understanding how they operate and what their motivations are is pretty important.
And are they just common regular people that are super intelligent, wearing jackets, walking down, having a Starbucks and grabbing a sandwich for lunch?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's an organization. So there's some of the people that are running these things, probably some of the developers that are building some of the code, super smart people. The rest of them are employees, and they train them. There's training manuals and so on. So,
wow.
So you think like the first person you're interacting with in a ransomware case, for example, may not speak English at all. They're just translating a script, or they're posting a script that has already been translated. So that means when you respond back to them, what do? Well, they take the language that you just put in the chat and they put it into a translator tool and back into their language. It's important to understand things like that because what you say and how that translates in tone and context in Ukrainian or whatever might make a difference in the outcome.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when ransomware happens, is this done manually or is it done completely automated?
There's different versions, but the larger ransomware platforms are almost entirely automated at this point. I mean, it's push a button, it does all the things, including the data exfiltration and creating the note and encrypting the files. And
so they're not going to. So no one's really going to read it, right? Unless you just pay them what they want.
Right. Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. The more mature platforms will be successful to some degree to double extortion. So they're taking a copy of all of your critical data, and then they're going to interrupt your operations, substantially.
Let's talk about ransomware now, right?
Okay.
Talk to us about the very first. I don't even know if you remember this, right? But your very first ransomware incident where you were called in and says, Kurtis, we have, Houston, we have a problem and we want you to help us.
Yeah, that was quite a while ago now. I think maybe something like 6 years ago. We had a client that was a client to our core products, and they had an incident. And so the CISO had called me and said, hey, you guys have a reputation for talking to bad guys. We need to talk to the bad guy. Will you do that? And I was trying to explain to him, it's actually quite different. Like we're undercover. Like we're not negotiating. Maybe we haggle over a price of some stolen data or something, but it's not the same. It's not like a ransom negotiation. And he asked me if I knew someone who did this work. And I said, I had met someone who had claimed to do this work. I'd had dinner with the person. I didn't know him that well. I said, would you like me to go find him and see if he wants to help us? And he was like, we're in a hurry. He's like, just subcontract that guy and bring him to the meeting tomorrow. We're going to start the negotiation.
And this was a CISO?
It was a deputy CISO of a fairly large publicly traded company.
Okay.
And, we all show up the next day. They were using WebEx. I don't know.
Right.
Even, I guess it's 6 years ago, but it seems like Zoom was already taking over that. But anyways, they're using WebEx. So everybody's popping on the WebEx. It looks like the Brady Bunch. So I've got the CEO, CSO, CISO, deputy CISO, internal and external counsel, somebody from the incident response firm, somebody from the FBI. Anyway, and basically everybody shows up except for the guy that I subcontracted.
Wow.
And, I told myself, hey, look, we just got to get through this meeting. Maybe his kids are sick or, I don't know. We'll find him. I don't know if this case just scared him because of the scale, but he completely ghosted me. And I ended up doing the entire negotiation myself, kind of on the fly. And that was the first one I'd ever done. Lucky for me, I'm a quick learner. I obviously went back to some of the best negotiation books in the world, and I was cramming them every night. This went on for about 2 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks, the negotiation. And but also a lot of the folks that work for us are former, intelligence community, or we had several people who were former undercover police who'd been trained in some of these things. And so I was using them as a sounding board. And in the end, I had a very successful result, getting to about 10% of the original ask. And then we closed the case. And that was the first one that GroupSense did, and almost by accident. And then the insurance company and the law firm called me up, and they're like, bro,
you saved me 90%.
you did pretty good. Let's try this again. And almost reluctantly, we're like, well, it's not our core business, but let's see where this goes. And it snowballed very quickly. And, at some point I was profiled in the New Yorker. They did a full, long form profile on me. And that's where it matured, because folks that came out of, for example, that came out of the Harvard negotiation project, I got to meet Chris Voss, who wrote Never Split the Difference. and which is a very famous negotiation book that was really focused on ransom negotiation, hostage negotiation. And all these people kind of called me and said, "Hey, we want to collaborate." And so we, taking those, academic approaches and, people like Chris's approaches that are, sort of tried and true in the police negotiation, hostage negotiation space, combining all of that in this Venn diagram of, business and hostage, it became like a real scientific approach over the years. And so it just keeps going.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you negotiate, right, in traditional negotiation techniques, they'll say, "I want $100 million," and you go like, "Yeah, right. Good luck to you. Why don't you just burn the stuff? It's not valued at $100 million. I'll pay you 10,000."
Right.
Does that really happen?
That's not how I would go about it. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, we see the transcripts from we have access to a lot of the transcripts from either the victims doing it or, other firms trying to do it. And so we've seen versions of that. What you just described was you immediately went to a very sort of
Lowball.
Well, it's positional bargaining, and so like you almost always get there eventually, but you don't want to start there. You don't want to put a stake in the ground like that so early in the negotiation. But yeah, that happens.
So what would you do? All right, let's just do a role play right now.
Yeah,
Right,
sure.
you have a ransomware client, and I want $100 million. Right now.
First disclaimer: do not try to do this on your own. The bad guys are good at this.
Right.
So it depends. So first of all, we know a lot about the groups. So we know how they negotiate. Some of them have very specific scripts and playbooks. So that's going to change how I talk to them based on who the group is. But if let's say it's someone that I think these kinds of traditional negotiation tactics will work with is one, I would try to understand how they came up with the number. So you're going to do multiple things every time you talk to them. One, you're going to indicate that you intend to do a transaction. You're going to plant that seed, and you're going to water that seed through the whole conversation. So they know that at the end of this,
let's not waste time. I'm going to get something.
I'm going to get something. Yeah. So you want to keep doing that, but we also want to sort of have them as quantitatively as possible try to justify the price. And that's going to take several back and forth and questions and things like that. Now, also keep in mind that as part of the data exfiltration, they probably took a copy of your finances. So in those cases, we can, it depends on the size of the data set and stuff like that. We can either call their bluff, say, well, if you read my finances, you know that I can't afford that, even if you could, because they may not be able to read the documents or find them. Or you acknowledge them and then give them a business class. I mean, these go a lot of different directions, but yeah.
But with ChatGPT 5, they're going to be able to read everything. Financial document. I know.
I've been telling people that as well. Yeah,
they're going to be able to know everything about everything that even you might not know.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And that's the world of AI that we're going to deal with.
Well, and that their ability now to digest the documents at scale and find the really juicy ones to use as leverage they've already been doing that.
So that's going to make life a lot more difficult for those to negotiate, unless you really don't have money.
Right.
Right. Unless you really downtrodden, then I guess at that point in time it doesn't matter.
Right.
And you said you knew most of the gangs, but there could be do you get a new gang cropping up every now and then? Yeah,
but they're usually some amalgamation of groups from other gangs sort of reforming in a new fashion. So it's probably the same couple hundred people kind of moving around, like switching jobs in Silicon Valley, right? From going from Google to Facebook to whatever.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's crazy.
And they hire, they'll bribe or hire the developer from one to the other, just like we do here in tech.
And do they get busted?
Very rarely. Keep in mind that most of these are operating in countries where they've either got some official, first of all, they're in countries that don't extradite to the U.S., for crimes. Their government has offered them some unofficial amnesty for their behavior. I believe there's some quid pro quo for that, but like we can talk about that later. But so most of the time, no. There's still value, I believe, in attempting to do some real attribution. And some researchers have been quite good at that. John DiMaggio, who's a friend of mine, has been quite good at that. And the reason why is, while we can't slap handcuffs on them while they're in St. Petersburg. If they step on a plane, they decide they're going to go to the Maldives, or something. We want to be waiting for them at the airport, right? And so there's a reason to do the attribution work.
The problem is the damage is already done, because I imagine, when you do these conversations, these negotiations take time. What's the typical time for a negotiation?
About 2 weeks.
So for 2 weeks, the company is not functional. So can you share with us any large corporations? I mean, I don't remember any very large global conglomerate being shut down for 2 weeks because of ransomware, but that doesn't mean that they were not ransomware.
Yeah. So usually the larger entities have some capability some disaster recovery capability, or some ability to recover at least partial operation. And so while you may not see it materially, they're still suffering. They're still missing files and records and data and critical systems, but they do, they've got enough resources that they've got, disaster recovery, platforms, plans in places that help them at least get it partially back up and running. It still costs them, millions and millions of dollars.
So tell me about a ransomware negotiation that went sideways.
I mean, we've had a handful that didn't turn out the way we wanted. I wouldn't call them all sideways. The groups, they're humans. I think it's important to remember that they're not robots. We're not negotiating with AI, although I have some stories about that as well. They will lose their temper. They usually threaten something like, hey, I'm just going to delete the decryption key and dump this data if they get kind of feisty. We've had a few cases. We've never had a case where they've actually done that, but we've had cases where they got that angry and that they threatened to dump the data. The ones that have gone really sideways, where it's just unrecoverable, have been more along the lines of they either still had access to the network, so the incident responders hadn't quite closed all the doors, or someone else had access as well. So I do a lot of tabletop exercises, and these are like fake scenarios where I walk people through and test their incident response capabilities and plans and decision making. And that's one of the ones that I throw at them is like, well, what if in this process you discover that there is more than one bad guy at play here, and they're not collaborative. They're both going for the neck. And so we've had a couple of those where, like, for example, Vice Society encrypted, Conti's encrypted files, like double encrypted. Two bad guys encrypted your files twice. So we've had stuff like that happen.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So do you have to pay twice?
In those cases, you could, except it's usually it's just a loss, because the files, when you double encrypt them like that, they're usually not recoverable, especially the larger files. And the one I'm thinking of now actually happened during Black Hat a couple of years ago. I was here when I was working that case, and they were all VMK files, and sort of VMDK files that were virtual machine. They're very large files, and those were not going to come back ever.
And what happened to the company?
That one, I think, shut down, if I remember right. They might have shut down operations. Yeah, it was a managed service company.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is the real world out there.
Yeah.
And when you talk to these negotiators, when you talk to these ransomware criminals, how is it done? It's obviously not done Zoom. Let's switch on your video and say, hey, hi, how are you doing? Right. You had your coffee.
That'd be entertaining. But no, it's usually done. Each group has their own sort of style of how they do the communication. Most of the more mature ones have a dark web website that has an embedded chat window in the web browser. That's most of them. Some of them do it over, sort of peer-to-peer encrypted communications like Tox or some Jabber, things like that. But mostly it's this sort of dark web embedded chat tool.